All right, unlocking incentives for recharge. Laura, this is good stuff.
Yes, thank you everybody so much for staying. You guys are all the brave souls that have all that energy and love for Floodmar that you're staying the entire day. So thank you so much. So I'm gonna start with I'm part of one of the action teams for the Floodmar network, and it's the incentives for groundwater recharge. Oh, and I'm also going to introduce the rest of the panel. My name is Laura Ramos. I'm the director of the California Water Institute at Fresno State. And then also on the panel, we have Richael Young from Sustainable Conservation. We have Spencer Cole from PPIC, as well as Mary Grimm from UC Berkeley. Thank you for joining me. Okay, so the Floodmar Action Team, the Incentives for Groundwater Recharge, is focusing on removing the but from landowner recharge efforts. I want to do recharge, but I don't have enough money. I want to do recharge, but I don't know what are some of my options. I want to do recharge, but I don't have the technical expertise. And so our committee or our action team has been focusing on that. Here you'll see all of the names of the participants. As somebody mentioned earlier, we are all volunteers, and we do this because we love incentives to recharge. And so we focus on helping this. And then Sam Cunningham from Provo and Pritchard, he's around here somewhere. There he is. He is my co-lead, so thank you for staying to be my cheerleader. Let's see. So what is the main challenge that we're trying to help? As I mentioned earlier, we have 3 that we've identified that are some of the biggest barriers. The first one is funding gaps. There's limited access to capital. There has been some financial incentives and some support, but is not extensive enough for everything. Then there's a knowledge barrier, insufficient understanding of all of the different recharge types, the sustainability of them, what are their benefits, the differences, and then also just technical expertise. It is very complex. We have a lot of permitting issues, technical requirements that are just sometimes hard to get through. And so the goal of our team is to identify and create a comprehensive tool of all of the resources to systematically reduce these implementation barriers and accelerate groundwater recharge adoption. So our approach, we've done it we are working on 3 different phases. So the first one that we've spent the majority of our time on is just a comprehensive inventory. We've developed an Excel, not a fancy database, just an Excel database of all of the incentives, funding sources that we've found that all of our team has that span everything from federal, state, local, and private opportunities. From there, we're going to do some innovative examples. Some of our farmers and our landowners have had very much success and have gotten through these barriers that could serve as an example for those that are not completely there. And so what we want to do is create some examples such as pumping credits and successful local district programs that have helped increase recharge. And so we want to identify those, showcase them as examples. And lastly, we want to do a broad dissemination. We want to share all of the findings with landowners, with agencies, NGOs, tribes, and maximize the implementation and the impact of all of the efforts that we've been working on. So all of the progress to date, we've completed a resource database-ish. We're still constantly working on, there's implementations that are coming up new every day. There are a lot of funding sources that are coming up every day, so we have put them together. We also did a coordinated effort for getting a lot of this information. Some of us on their team have more access to identify some of the technical expertise, others to identify the funding. So we coordinated who is going to identify which incentives, and then we've identified some local people and district levels that can help us identify some of these incentives. So some examples of the incentives, as I mentioned earlier, just direct funding, as well as just some technical assistance from the locals that are helping them, regulatory streamlining of some of the permitting, some incentives, as well as just local partnerships. Sometimes we don't look at partnerships as part of an incentive to increase groundwater recharge. So some of the next steps, so one of the things that we identified, and that leads into the next speaker, is that Sustainable Conservation had done a survey already and had collected a lot of this data. And so what we did is, instead of duplicating what they were already doing or some of the questions and the information they were collecting, we focused our efforts on what was not in their survey so that we can help augment some of that information. And so we'll integrate that into ours. We will continue to refine the database and all of the incentives. We'll place it out once it's semi-ready to get some stakeholder feedback, what should be on it, what shouldn't be on it, and then develop a tool that will be housed in the Floodmont Network website for all of you all to see. So just a call to action. We want to expand our knowledge of all of the incentives. So see if you know of some that we've missed. We want to share regional examples, and then we want to build all of this list of incentives together with you all. So if you have any incentives, local ones or just unique ones, please reach out to any of us on the committee that we'd love to share. We want this to be twofold, that if you are one that is developing these incentives and you're like, what do I even do as an incentive? That you can look at this list and see, oh, this is what so-and-so is doing and so-and-so. I could adapt this in my area. Oh, that won't work in my area, but that they all serve as options. So that is my call to action today. So next, I will hand it right over to Rachel.
Thank you so much, Laura. One thing that I've really enjoyed about being part of the incentives action team is, well, first of all, I'm an economist, so it gives me more opportunities to talk about financial incentives. So very, very fun for me, but also just a really great opportunity to learn and to collaborate and to fill gaps for one another as we work on advancing groundwater recharge. One really important thing about incentives is that, we have seen a lot of examples, including today and yesterday that we've heard about, where people are, doing this work, that our early adopters have taken on this work because they know it's the right thing to do. And they, are really just doing this out of the good of their hearts. But, in order to scale this to the size that we need, incentives are going to be really functional to make that happen. Anecdotally, we've seen that those districts that have integrated incentives have much more participation than those that have not incorporated incentives. So, we see this as a really important tool to be able to, catalyze growers to being part of the solution in groundwater sustainability. Before I launch into my presentation, I do want to acknowledge the Department of Water Resources, who's been an incredible partner to us in this work and has funded the findings that I'm going to present today. They funded the original survey that, kind of got us launched into some of this work on what are the range of incentives, what does that portfolio look like across the San Joaquin Valley to scale on-farm recharge, and now they're funding an effort of ours to update that survey. So if you want to look at our, given that our new survey is still in progress, if you want to see the one that we published in May of 2023, the QR code is there, and you can download it and read more about the range of incentives that are available. What was kind of incredible was just the timing that we did this survey. We published it in May of 2023, did most of the interviews in 2022, and so by the time it was published, it was already out of date, just given the incredible water year of 2023 and how much innovation and fast action there was. And so that's one of the really important reasons why we're getting this report updated currently. So I'm going to be presenting the findings from this 2023 document, so just know that it's out of date, it's not comprehensive, and if you would like to help us make sure that it is, I have a survey and a call to action for you later. So there are a broad number of ways that we can incentivize action for groundwater recharge. And I'm going to go over all of these different strategies very briefly, given the amount of time that I have. But these are occurring all across the San Joaquin Valley and increasingly across many parts of the Sacramento Valley and even in coastal GSAs as well. So first off, reduced cost for recharge water. This is, a really, and before I get into the strategies, I'll mention too that, Spencer later is going to be talking about different funding opportunities that are available. And so, just thinking about whether you need a budget for some of these incentives, some of them you do need a budget. There's going to be cash that goes out the door as part of your incentive strategy. And for others, there really isn't money that needs to go out of the door for you to be able to do that. So I'm going to, try to weave some of that into, talking about the different strategies that are here today. So reduced cost for recharge water. A lot of, water districts, they have delivery costs, they have wheeling costs. To incentivize people taking recharge water, they'll reduce the cost of that water or even make it no cost water so that it's free to divert onto the field. So that can be a really great opportunity, and it has no cash is going out the door, but it does impact your revenues as a district. The next is subsurface recharge cost share programs, and I think we heard about a couple of those through forums. So we heard about Westland's Water District doing some of that. We heard about RD 108 and Dunnigan Water District doing some of this work. So this is to provide cost share for those reverse tile drains that are going underground. So this can be quite costly, but certainly. Certainly a great program. Next is surface water bill credits. So this is that if you're using, if you're applying that surface water and recharging groundwater, you essentially get a credit on your surface water bill. So reduces your revenues, but doesn't require cash out the door. Groundwater pumping credits. We're certainly seeing more and more of this particular incentive take hold. We heard about this from Westland's Water District. We've also heard about this from Tulare Irrigation District. So, a growing number of districts are looking to develop these recharge credit programs. And essentially, this really only works if you have a groundwater pumping allocation, and that's a limit to how much groundwater you're allowed to pump. And the recharge credit will then allow you to pump more given how much you've put underground. There's usually a leave behind is what it's typically called. So if you put 100 acre feet under the ground, you might only get 75 acre feet as a credit towards your allocation. So and those leave behinds do vary. In fact, we heard a little bit about that from Stephanie Anagnason yesterday when she was talking about Madera County GSA's program. Flood easements. I think there was a question yesterday from Eric Cadaret about, flood easements, but this is essentially a contractual agreement where, you won't know that you don't know when you have to take flood water, but when you were told you have to take flood water, you take it onto your ground. So it could mean the loss of your crop, but you're then compensated for it. So these are typically long-term arrangements that folks will enter into. And it's not a super common practice, but it can. I think this could be a good solution, particularly for reducing flood risk. And then increasingly, as SGMA is being implemented, there is going to be more and more fallowed ground, including leases, for reducing groundwater demands. And these are really good opportunities for, essentially making even more benefits or values out of that land by then turning it into recharge land. So Turlock Irrigation District, for example, has an idle lands program where recharge can be conducted there. Increasingly, we're seeing a focus on multi-benefit outcomes. These can include aims to improve drinking water quality or quantity, ecosystem function, or flood risk reduction. We also heard about subsidence mitigation from Westlands Water District. A number of multi-benefit programs have been mentioned through forum. We've heard about those from Audubon, the Nature Conservancy, from MLRP, and then we just heard in the previous session also about some of the strategies by Okieville and some of the things that are going on in the Sacramento Valley as well. So all very exciting, and I think one opportunity for multi-benefit recharge is potentially even stacking some of those incentives so that you're not just getting an incentive payment or some kind of value for the recharge water that's going underground, but also for this additional benefit. So, increasingly there's more of a focus on thinking about stacking benefits, and this is a really nice opportunity to do that. As I mentioned, we're working on updating our incentives document, and so this is an active collaboration and partnership that we have with the Department of Water Resources as well as the Almond Board of California. If you have gotten the survey and you haven't taken it, please do so. We will be following up, so you might as well just be proactive and do it. And if you haven't heard about it, if this is the first time you're hearing about it, you haven't gotten this email invitation from us to take part, we really want to make sure that your voice is heard, and so please come up to me or really any member of the Sustainable Conservation team, but particularly Wendy Rash, who's leading this survey effort, and we'd love to make sure that we include you in the survey. So thank you so much for your time and attention.
Thank you, Richael. And now we have Spencer talking about specific financing incentives. Or financial incentives.
Thank you, Laura. My name is Spencer Cole. I'm from the Public Policy Institute of California, and I was asked today to speak a little bit about the state funding mechanisms that can help support recharge, and I'm going to focus specifically on Proposition 4, which we've heard a lot about already today, but I'm going to kind of take us through Proposition 4. What is it? What's in it? And what are the opportunities there that can help support the recharge efforts that we've been discussing. So first of all, what is Proposition 4? Proposition 4 was passed on the ballot in 2024, and it approves $10 billion of bond funding for water infrastructure and climate adaptation projects. And as we'll see, it covers a fairly wide range of program areas, including water supply, heat mitigation, and a variety of other areas. So as this is bond funding, the primary focus of Proposition 4 is going to be on capital investment projects, but there are a variety of other programs that can also be supported through grants via Proposition 4. And we'll see that the majority of this funding is allocated in the first couple of years of the program, 2025 through 2028, but there's also some funding continuing through 2040. Okay, so what's in Proposition 4? There's about $10 billion in total, and it's dispersed across, again, a pretty wide range of program areas. This is a summary courtesy of the Legislative Analyst's Office, or LAO. So the largest program area in Proposition 4 is the drought, flood, and water supply area, which is going to receive about $3.8 billion. There's $1.5 billion set aside for forest health and wildfire prevention, $1.2 billion for sea level rise and coastal areas adaptation, another $1.2 billion for land conservation and habitat restoration, $850 million for energy infrastructure. This is primarily solar conveyance infrastructure and wind farms, $700 million for parks and recreation, $450 billion for extreme heat mitigation, and lastly, $300 million for farms and agriculture. Again, this totals $10 billion, and you can see that about 3/4 of this funding is allocated for the first 3 years through 2028, but there will be additional funding dispersed between 2029 and 2040. And so what I wanted to do today is walk through the line items in Proposition 4 and try to highlight those that would be relevant for potentially supporting certain recharge efforts. So in doing so, I found that most of the relevant line items were going to be in that first category, the drought, flood, and water supply program area. But there might also be some additional funds in the farms and agriculture program area. And I also want to just mention, I didn't dig through this too much for this presentation, but my colleague Kamiar mentioned that there's also potential for a lot of opportunities in the fourth program area here, the land conservation and habitat restoration program area that has about $1.2 billion in it, that could have a lot of multi-benefit opportunities as well. So what are those line items that might be relevant for recharge opportunities? First of all, there's a $193 million line item from the Department of Water Resources that's going to include projects for increasing groundwater storage, groundwater management, recharge, and banking, as well as supporting SGMA implementation efforts. There's another $193 million line item also to DWR for conjunctive use programs. So this is all about managing the use of surface and groundwater resources conjunctively. There's $200 million for the multi-benefit land repurposing program, which, as we've heard about, has a pretty significant focus on projects including a recharge component. There's $475 million to the Natural Resources Agency, which includes a variety of repairs, improvements, and investments for flood control infrastructure as well as water conveyance infrastructure. And as we've heard earlier today, there are some pretty innovative flood control programs going on that tend to have some sort of recharge component to them. And we've also heard that water conveyance obviously is important in getting water to the areas where this recharge is actually going to occur. And then lastly, there's a couple different line items throughout different program areas that focus on a variety of different multi-benefit projects, which again could potentially include recharge components. And those include urban stormwater capture, on-farm water use and efficiency programs, protection, restoration, and enhancement of farmland. So this, again, totals out to about $1.2 billion that could potentially support certain recharge programs or projects that have a recharge component to them. And this is going to be administered by 5 primary agencies, and these include the Natural Resources Agency, which will be administering about 1/3 of this funding, the Department of Water Resources, which will administer about 31% of the funding, the Department of Conservation, which will administer about 18%, the State Water Resources Control Board, which will administer about 9% of the funding, and a small portion, about 3%, could be administered by the Department of Food and Ag. And another small portion of the funding will be administered by multiple different agencies. So that wraps up the Proposition 4 component of this. I also wanted to mention a couple other state programs that are relevant for recharge and this discussion today. I wanted to highlight again the Multi-Benefit Land Repurposing Program, MLRP. We heard a lot about that yesterday from various folks. This program had an initial fund of $90 million and is receiving another $200 million infusion from Proposition 4. And as we've heard, a lot of the awarded programs in the MLRP scheme have a recharge component to them. So this is an important program to kind of keep an eye on and use as sort of a template for some of these more multi-benefit projects that the state seems to be putting a lot of focus on. Another program I wanted to mention, which you might be a little bit surprised to see on this list when we're talking about recharge, is LandFlex. LandFlex is a program that occurred a couple years ago during the tail end of the drought we had. It had a funding pool of $25 million. And the intention of LandFlex was to essentially pay landowners to fallow their fields during the drought, primarily to protect domestic wells nearby that would be vulnerable to pumping rates. And what ended up happening is that by the time a lot of this funding for this program got out the door, we were already in 2023, which, as we've now know, ended up being a really wet year. And so what happened was a lot of those lands that were enrolled in LandFlex actually ended up also enrolling in local recharge programs so that they could put water on that ground that was already fallowed under the LandFlex program and get additional water into the ground. So this is kind of an interesting program that shows the flexibility of how you can have a drought-focused program that ends up having wet year benefits. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention briefly is Proposition 218 assessments. This is not a state mechanism necessarily, this is more of a local funding mechanism. But I wanted to mention that this is a really important funding mechanism for districts to keep their general operations going, as well as to make investments into recharge benefits. But there can be pretty strict limitations on how those funds can be used, and districts have to navigate that. So with that, that's going to wrap it up for me. Here's my contact info if you have any questions, and I'll pass it off to the next panelist, Marie.
Thank you, Spencer.
Good afternoon. Can you all hear me? Is everyone still awake? Being the last one to speak is always an honor. So my name is Marie Grimm, and I'm a research fellow at the Center for Law, Energy, and the Environment at UC Berkeley. And I was asked to present on some work that we did on funding for multi-benefit projects. We used the Pajaro Valley flood risk management as a case study, which Mark presented earlier. And yeah, my colleagues on this project were Molly Bruce, Anna Sarah-Yobay, and Mike Kaparsky, who I think a lot of you here know. And yeah, so why am I talking about this at the FloodMar Forum? I think we've heard a lot about the potential multi-benefits of FloodMar projects today. And the case study that we're using and the work that we did is not just about flood risk management or about a single project, but it's really about the bigger picture, about how we fund and implement and collaborate on projects that pursue multiple benefits. And we see increasing interest in multi-benefit projects also at the state level, but still there's challenges to implementing these projects, in part due to institutional silos, which Kamyar really highlighted yesterday morning. And we see that in the funding landscape. So we've used the Pajaro Valley Flood Risk Management Project to learn a bit more about funding challenges. And although the project was in part picked back up because of severe flooding, narrow levees also limit room for habitat and for recharge. And this project really showed an opportunity to pursue multiple objectives in the Pajaro Valley. So we analyzed the different funding sources. We looked at what kind of grants were used in this project and how their funding provisions hinder or support multi-benefit approaches, and then also drew implications for the funding for multi-benefit projects in general. And on the slide is a paper which we published. If you're interested in the methods, you can take a closer look. For now, I really just want to highlight that we couldn't have done it without our project partners. It was a larger UCOP project led by Andy Fisher, whose name we've also heard multiple times in the last 2 days. We've talked to many people at different agencies who helped us gain insight. And I also want to thank Mark for answering all of our questions. There were a lot of them, so thank you. So let's dive into the funding landscape. This is the big funding picture. And just as a background, the circle size does represent the grant amount that was used. And we're going to break this down into 3 main funding buckets, starting with those giant cutoff circles on the left-hand side. So what we see here is the core project funding for a flood risk management project. It's about $600 million federal and state funding to actually move the dirt, to fund the construction and fund setting back the levees. And by doing that, it creates space, and within that space, we have room to pursue other benefits. It is a single-purpose flood risk management project. And because of that authorization, the consideration of co-benefits in the funding allocation was limited, and it also technically limits the spending within the project to the primary goal. Still, the Flood Risk Management Agency, the Army Corps, people at DWR, with support of the EcoFIP team, managed to create a design that doesn't just build new levees, but reconnects floodplains for additional benefits in spite of funding challenges. Now, the second bucket is a lot smaller, and this is funding that was used to enhance the project. The colors indicate like the main focus of the funding source, and although some of these were multi-benefit or climate resilience funds, they didn't pay for the implementation or maintenance of additional benefits, but these funds were mostly used to enable additional design, planning, and research for this project. And with that approach, some funding gaps remained in the end, for example, for additional revegetation in setback areas, and also for the maintenance of non-flood control features, for example. And now I'm going to get through the third funding bucket. And for this one, we want to zoom out of this flood risk management project and look at the broader effort along the lower river valley. We've heard a bit about large-scale approaches in earlier panels, and I think Mark referred to them as bolt-on projects to this core project. So this includes things like building out levee segments that are not included in the core project, and generally implements like a broader vision of flood risk management and floodplain reconnection in the valley. And the approach to do that at the moment in the funding landscape is a piecemeal funding approach. Ultimately, it requires leveraging a ton of different funding sources, and to do that, you need people who have the knowledge on how to do that, who can collaborate to do that, and who have the capacity to do that. So all in all, this case study really shows that it is possible to do this kind of project, but it's not easy, and you have to kind of navigate this fragmented funding landscape. And this case also really shows that it hinges on individuals. So even when local leaders are interested in doing something like that, the funding provisions don't make it easy necessarily. And if we don't have structures that encourage or require these kinds of approaches, potential co-benefits may be left on the table in some areas where you don't have people that maybe have the interdisciplinary knowledge or the vision to do that, or don't have the ability or capacity to navigate the funding landscape that we have. Now, do we really want to depend on individuals? Wouldn't it be nice if there were funding provisions that made this kind of project super easy? And there's different ways to kind of go into that direction. One way is to have single agency grant programs that support multi-benefit projects through their funding provisions that require or reward co-benefits. And we see some of those already at DWR, for example. The MLRP program, which we've heard a lot about, also rewards co-benefits. But these grant programs are often used in combination with additional funding sources still. So coordinated funding across agencies would be the next step to either produce complementary programs that can be piecemealed together more easily, or to provide combined funding programs that span multiple agency priorities and co-benefits. So Prop 4, which we just heard about, is a great opportunity to coordinate funding because it has CNRA as a coordinating agency. There's been guidance that came out earlier this year that also highlights coordination as a key component. And our team at Berkeley has been thinking about some ways to apply the findings from the research that I just presented onto Prop 4 and help advance the state's multi-benefit goals. And on the left here, you again see the paper that we published. There's also a blog post if you don't feel like reading a peer-reviewed paper. It's a lot shorter. I do not have a QR code, but here's my email, and you can email me and I'll send it to you. Thank you. Sorry. I think that was too fast.
Yeah, it's okay. No worries. Thank you, Marie. So we have some time for some questions. Do we have some questions in the audience? Don't you all fall asleep. There we go. The microphone.
Regarding all the funding that the gentleman from DWR presented on, are there ways from the private sector to apply for that funding, get involved on the science that it would support?
That's a good question. I think a lot of those funds are slated for existing projects through the agencies administering those funds. So there's a variety of sort of shovel-ready projects that are already, the agencies are already aware of that that just need funding to be implemented, essentially. But there will be a grant solicitation period for the remainder of those funds that are not already slated towards specific projects. And I believe those agencies are working on developing what that guidance is and creating those platforms for those grant applications.
Yeah, I had a question. Can you hear me? Yes. I had a question about this last presentation. Thank you for that and for everyone. Are you working or are folks working with the agencies to help them design Prop 4 funding to be more able to incorporate multi-benefits like what you're talking about? Is there any work going on between the agencies and folks like yourselves or others?
So CNRA and the agencies are working together. There was also a recent webinar where they talked about things like coordination. We at this point are not working with the agencies to help. We'd love to do that. I think one key component of that work would also be to do workshops and things like that with agency personnel to learn a bit more about like internal processes and internal policies that might stand in the way of more coordination, and then try and identify ways to work against that. Yeah.
Really great to hear. Is this on? Yeah. Really great to hear all these aspects of funding. I'm wondering if you might be able to comment on something that I wished we started seeing, which is we often talk about capital funding, and voter-approved bond funding is always geared towards capital investment. And we also talk a lot about climate adaptation and resilience. And all those last few things really don't just drive at capital investment, it also drives at local agencies' inability to fund operations and maintenance. And so something that I often think about is, and maybe this is one of the calls to action of this group, is to start seeing O&M grant opportunities, not in perpetuity. I know there's problems with that promise, but as seed funding, and Graham and others are talking about this culture change that's needed out in the community for more communities, unfortunately, to put more skin in the game. And maybe one of the ways that we do that is we incentivize the start of that with, for example, the state saying, look, we'll kickstart this funding opportunity for O&M. We'll give you the start, but you also need to promise something out of that as a local agency, and then you also need to follow through with establishing a Prop 218 compliant assessment of some sort to then pick up where that grant leaves off. And so I'm wondering if you've thought at all about that and how it potentially could work or not.
I can't say I've thought a whole lot about how something like that would be structured, but I would definitely agree that there needs to be some thought about how to make these funds a little bit more sustainable. Because as you mentioned, relying on capital funding for solving these really long-term issues is just not going to work in the long term. Proposition 4 is a great infusion of funding towards these issues, but realistically, it's just going to make a dent. There needs to be more long-term consideration about the way that these kind of approaches can be funded. So I'd definitely be interested to hear if the other panelists have some thoughts on how something like that could be structured.
Yeah, I can only tag on that I agree. Like a lot of the funding sources we've seen are geared towards, some are like planning and design phase, then the big construction fund, but there really isn't anything besides local funding for O&M. And that is a key point to make, not only make these projects happen, but also assure that they can deliver benefits in the long run. But unfortunately, I don't have an answer on how to fix that problem.
Yeah, same. And I think on the other hand is the shovel ready. Like, how much does it take to get a project to shovel ready too? Is, you know, that there needs to be some incentives and some financial support and technical support to even get to that point to be ready. But, you know, because it's almost like the building of it and the capital improvement is the middle. But who's funding the pre and who's funding the post to make that project success? So I think there needs to be consideration to that as well. Any other questions?
Yeah, I had one over here. Actually, this actually kind of builds on what Mark just talked about, and I think maybe there's a lesson to be learned from the ecosystem mitigation banking community, where as part of approving of those projects, they need to set up like endowment accounts to manage the lands in perpetuity. And so, you know, when we're thinking about these projects, like maybe that seed funding, a big portion of it or a portion of it needs to go into an endowment that's going to fund O&M in perpetuity. And that's a mechanism that's already out there. It's being used by a big community of practitioners, and I think we could learn from that community.
Who had their hands up? You guys are flashing them too fast.
Not so much a question, but I wish Aaron would be still here, continuing the theme we had. He has said at a recent contemporary groundwater issues meeting, and I'm going to combine that with his other thing, to keep water sexy, he had proposed that we need a $2 to $5 billion investment per year to keep water alive in California. And it's really something to think about. You know, agriculture is 1.5% of the state's GDP. It's very small compared to the other dollars that are floating around in the state, yet everyone needs water. So when are we going to tap into private industry funds to fund the water?
Any comments from anybody? Just head shaking? Yes. Did you want to say something?
I mean, I guess the only comment I'll say to that is, you know, the one other funding mechanism that comes to mind, you know, that we had not talked about, but gets to your point, Helen, is that there is a growing interest in corporations wanting to offset their water footprint. And so they're looking a lot to the NGO community to help with, you know, really being a liaison to cite those types of projects and, you know, help them offset their water footprint. So that is a source of capital that I think is, you know, small because they haven't set a lot of budget towards it, but growing because, you know, more and more companies are seeing that, you know, water risk is business risk.
A little bit more of a comment also building off of that idea that the capital cost is really the middle part of the cost. I think that's one of the big challenges of these grant funds is that because of that, the grantee applicant has to be in the position of having done all that front work, and they have to be in the position of doing the O&M because these grants do require, you know, a 15-year life of the project or 30-year life of the project. And so, I mean, the idea of seed funding to really do that front work and to help these agencies do the 218 or whatever is needed for that long-term funding, that's for the disadvantaged communities or the small kind of, we're in this realm of new agencies, right? GSAs that are really just figuring out how to keep the lights on. We've made major steps forward in that realm. They now have fees to do that, but now to be able to do projects, or if it's a new water district, they're going to be challenged to be even ready for this Prop 4 funding because of that front-loaded work. So I think thinking about how to kind of step into that piece is important.
take one more. Back there.
Yeah, I have a confession to make. Mike Kaparsky's been talking at me for years about multi-benefit stuff, and he's probably not noticed my blank stares back at him where I kind of don't engage in the conversation. So I think I have a blind spot. Maybe you can help me. So in my mind, of course, recharge, anything that's that sexy is multi-benefit. There's lots of benefits. So is it that if you don't go into the project understanding the multi-benefits, the project design suffers and it is not designed in a way to actually capitalize on all the benefits? Or maybe you're saying both these things. Or are you saying you have to tout the multi-benefits to get the project off the ground, to get it funded? So is it more of a funding attraction issue, or an issue that if you don't recognize the multi-benefits, your project comes off a bit half-assed or under-designed? Which is it, or is it something else that my pea brain is still reaching for?
I would say it depends on what kind of project you have and what kind of funding structures you're depending on. For this specifically, it's an Army Corps flood risk management project. And the way the Army Corps looks at funding allocation, at least at the time where the decisions for this project were made, it's a cost-benefit analysis that doesn't really look at additional benefits when making decisions on funding allocation. And if there hadn't been people who saw the potential, instead of just rebuilding new levees, they could set the levees back and create more space for recharge and habitat benefits, the project may have looked very different with narrow levees instead of the old ones. But it's project design, but it also, I think it really depends on where the key funding comes from and who's working on it ultimately, in answer to your question.
Yeah. So
Mark, I think, would like to add something here.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Super good question, Graham, and I can help at least with the context of our project, is that it was very much a levy bread and butter project with the Corps. The setback proposal has been in existence for a long time, but in our case it was someone else, I was part of that, looking at that and saying, this is more than just a setback project. There's other things, there's other opportunities to seize upon here and recognize. But I think both options that you presented are both part of the truth. You can take projects like ours and choose to either look at them through a very limited lens and say this is a bread and butter levy project with the Army Corps, or you can look at it like we're looking at it, which is real. Or there are other projects where right from the start you're designing multiple benefits as objectives or design features. But to Marie's point, getting the funding requires one or both of those. My sense is none of us right now are able really to advance capital projects without them being multiple benefit. That's just the name of the game today. I have a little problem with that just because it's hard to achieve, to check all the boxes. And a lot of funding opportunities and agencies want to see all those boxes checked, and guess what? We can't always check all those boxes. That doesn't mean it's not worth pursuing, but that's my take on the situation.
So what I was going to say is that I think it's both. And the only thing is that I don't think that if it's only one purpose, it's half-assed. It's just that either the funding or the knowledge wasn't there. Because sometimes a landowner can be very willing to put a recharge basin to benefit his land, and not knowing that if they just put it in another corner of their property, it's now benefiting a disadvantaged community, and it's giving them the same benefit, but also augmenting the benefits of this recharge basin because it costs more money. So they could just have the money to do one benefit, but then with additional funding, then they could support multi-benefit. So I think it's a little bit of both. So is that our time?
We're sneaking one final question in with Diane. She's been waiting so patiently, and that is it.
Okay.
Okay, mine is this on?
Yes.
Oh, mine is more of a, I think the gentleman, like maybe a forum or a panel back said something about private, and I was like, oh, I forgot about them. And then I remembered carbon credits. If you don't know what carbon credits are, it's dairymen. They've been either doing practices that are seen as sustainable, or they have dairy digesters, and so they grab these carbon credits, and then major airlines purchase this from dairymen to basically say that they're reducing emissions. Maybe not their emissions, but in total. So I just wanted to put that in this space that they're doing that with carbon, and maybe they can do that with water, like the PepsiCos of the world, the big data AI centers in this space. You know, you guys are the leaders in Floodmar, Agmar, all the flood things.
Well, thank you, everybody. So just one reminder, if you want to help us build this database, an idea of incentives, either let Sam or Megan or any of me know that you want to help in our committee, in our, what is it? Action team.
Action team.
Action team.
And that is a perfectly smooth transition to our final session. Thank you, incentives group.